What's that sound? It's for amusement only, the EM and Bingo Pinball Podcast. Welcome back to For Amusement Only. This is Nick Baldridge, and I have a special guest here today, Ryan Claytor.
Hello.
Comics illustrator and artist extraordinaire, as well as a good friend of mine. And I've been spending some time up here with Ryan, and he's been showing me the sights, the sounds, the smells.
Of the Great White North. And by that we mean Michigan.
The South. So I've been staying with Ryan and his family, and they've been showing me lots of hospitality up here. And I've had lots of games to work on, which is excellent.
Lots of hospitality means putting Nick to work. There's so many double entendres here. I feel like a translator.
That's what I love the most, though. So I just wanted to quickly kind of go over some of the games that I worked on and then what I did to fix them, or, you know, things that we talked about that are still broken and I need to fix. But I'm running out of time. That's the only problem.
Because you haven't spent enough of your vacation working on my machines.
Look, is everything fixed yet? No? So first let's start with penny pitch. All right, so penny pitch has a residual problem, which we'll come back to. But the first thing that it was doing is when you spun the wheel, if you max out your spin, if you spin it super crazy hard, then what happens is there's a stepper in the back that continues to step. And this stepper is actually moving the penny across one little lighted element at a time. And once you hit the max extension on that, it's supposed to stop stepping that stepper. Well, for whatever reason, it was continuing to step, and it was just going clunk, 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 clunk. There's a brake that's actually involved, and it will stop the wheel from spinning. But the brake doesn't engage until it goes to switch players, and at that point, it stops the wheel hard. That wasn't happening, and once I cracked it open, I saw exactly why. In the back of that stepper, there is a dual stack of switches that hit and open with the max extension of that stepper, and they were not changing state. So the game was never getting the signal that it was maxed out, and it was allowing it to continue to step forever. You know, you spin it hard enough, it would just keep going. So that was a quick fix, and that took care of that problem.
Now Nick Baldridge can show me his Taylor Reese ham fist spins on penny pitch, and things stop just like they're supposed to.
Yeah, so it's great. Instead of hearing clunk, clunk, clunk at the end, you just get that sound of silence before it takes it away from you.
Now it doesn't have to burn up a coil anymore.
Yeah, not as much anyway. So the residual problem, and this is a much harder problem, is that there's some sort of short in the game, and depending on the pitch, the shot number, as well as the position of that stepper that moves the penny, you will get lighted elements illuminated on the opposite side of that stepper where it is currently. And I've taken apart that stepper partially. I haven't taken the spaghetti disc off yet. I've taken that stepper away completely, and the problem is a little better, but not great. So I'm suspecting that there's a short in the bundle, which is going to be a lot of fun. So in order to fix that, you know, the bundle has to be sliced open, and you've got to look and trace out the wires individually and possibly replace a wire.
And that might be more than a vacation fix.
Unfortunately, at this point, I'm thinking it might be.
Yeah.
But, you know, can't fix everything.
You fixed about 1 million other games while you're here.
All right, so let's move on to something
Essentially
else.
doubling my collection.
Yeah.
My functional collection.
That's the idea. So another one that I worked on was Paul Bunyan.
Yeah.
Paul Bunyan is a game that I'd never played before. It's a 1960...
68, if I'm not mistaken.
68 Gottlieb, and 2-player. It's got beautiful backglass playfield artwork, and it's got a really challenging yet simple sequence. It seems it's really kind of a tantalizing game because it seems right within your reach at all times, but it's really not at all. So up at the top, as you enter the playfield, there's a sequence for A, B, C on rollovers. The same sequence is repeated down at the bottom on stand-up targets, which are placed between the bottom set of flippers. And you have to get that sequence in order. So say you roll through the A, it unlights A, B and C remain lit. Then you have to hit B and then C in order down at the bottom, which is extremely dangerous, or work your way all the way back up to the top and loop through the next set of rollovers. And in order to help you do that, there are 6 flippers. These 6 flippers are really, they feel like a throwback to the fairy tale series. They're arranged in a similar fashion, but they are downward facing instead of upward facing.
Which makes a lot of sense with the theme of the game, too, because Paul Bunyan, you've got this fairy tale, and it didn't really dawn on me that that was a thematic throwback, too, until you mentioned it the other night.
Yeah, it's kind of neat when taken in context like that. At least I think so.
Mm-hmm.
It might not have been the intent, but it's cool.
It's a piece of art. We can read into it whatever we want.
There we go. This is why it's helpful to have an artist on here. So, yeah, the sequence, again, seems very easy. It's only 3 letters. How hard could that be? But you'll find yourself losing the ball a lot more frequently than you think might be possible.
When those stand-up targets are right in front of you, they are drain monsters. So if it's possible to loft it back up to the top of the playfield and hope that you can nudge it around into the correct lane, that's probably safest. But as you say, it's pretty tantalizing to knock off that B or C when it's just right there. I can complete the sequence.
A glancing blow will send it right back to the other flipper, and away I go.
Or the outlane.
Or straight out of the game. So the outlane gives you some consolation scoring, and there's an alternating relay which will light one side or the other. There's 2 outlanes on either side. So ideally you want to go down the lit outlane for 200 points, but as generally happens to me, it's 50 points. And everything's great there. But once you complete the sequence, you can reset the bank. And in order to do that, one of the letters in ABC will light at random, and you hit that letter, and kerchunk, the bank resets, and you get to do it all over again. One of the fun things about it, you can earn an extra ball, and the playfield is essentially divided into 3 separate and distinct sections. At the bottom, you've got the ABC stand-up targets, as Ryan and I were talking about. Above that, you have a middle section, which is really geometrically pretty interesting. You've got stand-up targets, which are wedged at the top of this triangle that holds those stand-up targets. What did you think about that once you started smacking a ball around?
So you're talking about the stand-up target that's like almost directly above the middle flippers, is that right?
No, I'm talking about the ones which are angled inward at the top of the ABC triangle.
Oh, yes, just above the ABC stand-up targets. Yeah. I mean, overall, I think this is a really interesting game because every one of the 6 flippers sprinkled around the playfield has their own unique set of targets. Like you can't exactly hit those from any other flipper, and that's pretty unique. And I feel like it's a lot more thought out than the original fairy tale series because you were still sort of in this post flipperless era, but oh my gosh, here's this thing we just invented. Let's throw it on the playfield. And they don't exactly have direct targets to them, whereas by 1968, there had been 20 years of flippers being used, and Wayne Nyans had designed a whole lot of games by then. And consequently, I think he was able to really pinpoint and target where he wanted this projectile to go. And I just think it's such a unique gameplay experience. I can't think of anything else like it. But to get back to your question, I dig each of those sort of like mini play fields in a way, but yet at the same time, you can use those flippers to work your ball back up this ladder of mini play fields back to the top. Yeah, I'm all about it.
I find it very fun. You have rollover lanes on either side near that middle play field, and they feed the middle flippers. Which is kind of neat. So as you're coming down, if you miss the rollover lanes, and there is the opportunity to do that, you don't have to go down A, B, or C. It doesn't funnel you into there. You can go down either side and it'll roll right to the middle flipper.
Mhm.
And from there, you can make this kind of bank shot onto that white stand-up target that's up at the top. And you only get 50 points, but it's very satisfying, I think. And directly above that, Ryan was mentioning another stand-up target. There are lots of stand-up targets on this game, which normally I'm not a huge fan of if the game is all stand-up targets. But something about the geometry of this game really makes it a lot of fun compared to, say, a modern game that's all stand-up targets. And these targets are kind of the classic Gottlieb bullseye targets, not the two-phase bullseye targets, but they're a bullseye pattern. And when you hit them, you either get, I believe it's 50 points, or you'll qualify the extra ball. But in order to get the extra ball, you have to go through this roll under gate, which is all the way at the top of the playfield. And
Which Nick tells me is accessible from a flipper.
it's totally accessible.
I haven't managed to get it from a flipper yet, but that's not saying much. That's a low bar to set if you're using me as an example. But
We've only played a handful of games, so it's. But yeah, it's quite fun, and that roll under gate also will award you this massive amount of points the first time you hit it, 500 points. However, as soon as you do that, it trips a relay, and then you only get 50 points.
Mhm.
So if you're able to find that sweet spot on those upper flippers and just bat it back and forth, you're not getting very many points for that. And it's an extremely dangerous thing, too.
it would also be a minor miracle if you could bat that back and forth.
Yep. So, and in that way, it also feels like the fairy tale games, too, because in those games, you're not really volleying back and forth, except you're going from, say, the mid-tier down to the lower tier. You're not going up the playfield and down. On Paul Bunyan, the flipper strength is so much greater, and the angle is such that you can actually work your way back up, which is neat.
Yeah.
But really, you're not kind of throwing back and forth on those fairy tale games, and in that way, you're not really throwing back and forth through that gate. But or at least I'm not.
Yeah, and it's got enough randomness. Like in the upper middle section, you have this nest of 3 pop bumpers, which gives you some ball action up there. And we haven't even mentioned the Art Steinholm back glass on this thing, which I just crack up every time I see this thing. I mean, it's very well illustrated, but essentially it's Paul Bunyan sitting on a mountain, filing a pine tree with his giant buck knife. But while he's doing this, there's all these maidens keeping him up by raking his hair or combing his hair with a rake, or giving him a sponge bath with a broom of some sort, or tending to him in some way. And he's just got this very enjoyable grin on his face. Like I said, it cracks me up every time I see it.
My favorite is the lady who's shaving him with an axe.
Yes. Gotta trust that one.
Yeah. But so everything about this game is quite enjoyable, and I've certainly heard a lot of bad things about this game, and I've spoken with Wayne Nyans. I aired that interview last year at some point, and he had said this was a very rushed game for him. He had a lot of trouble finding the time to work on it, so he felt like it wasn't really his best effort. But I've got to say, it's quite fun, and I don't know what you think.
Yeah, I've also talked with Wayne, and he said very similar things, that he was rushed, and he was also not in a designer position at the time. He was, I think, a chief engineer at Gottlieb at the time, and so he wasn't designing anymore, and he hadn't designed a game in quite a while, but they needed something to fill the line, and so he had felt like he sort of threw some stuff on a play field and hoped for the best and shoved it out the door, and consequently, I think he's got memories of it not being his best, probably because he couldn't spend the time on it that he wanted to. But I feel like he's got, at the time, he had decades of design experience behind him. And I feel like that sort of was sort of like riding a bicycle for him. I don't think he forgot how to do it. I don't think he forgot how to make a good game. And I feel like this was such a retro modern throwback. And by retro modern, I mean at the time in the late 60s, it was modern in its gameplay, but this throwback to 20 years earlier when the flippers were invented. And consequently, I think it's a super fun game. I can't wait to put some more plays on it.
Yeah. So let me talk a little bit about what was wrong with the game. It really wasn't all that much, or at least I don't remember it being all that much.
It's hard to remember much at 3 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, that's part of the problem. So one of the things was that the power switch was tied together. I don't know who came up with this plan, but somebody had taken one of the leads off the power switch and tied it to the other one. So essentially the switch was bypassed.
I swear it wasn't me.
I mean, I believe you. I'm looking right in your eyes right now. But yeah, it was very interesting. So, I mean, that was a really minor problem. But it would start, but it was always in two-player mode. Was that the issue?
I think you got to this while I was child rearing or something. I don't
Yeah,
know.
it's been a very busy time here.
Yeah.
So we've been kind of tackling stuff as we can. Gosh, I am blanking on whatever the problem was right now. But there was some kind of problem that did not require unit rebuild. It only required relay action. Basically, I had to go through a few of the relays, and especially on the sequence bank, to rebuild those. On Paul Bunyan, one of my least favorite mechanisms that's a Gottlieb mechanism is the relay tripped notifier, I guess signaler. And it's this little switch that resides under one of the trip relays. And it says, hey, this bank is ready to reset. Or it has reset. And this little switch can be very problematic because it rides basically right on the relay, the armature itself. And so it can come out of adjustment very easily. It's essentially invisible because it lives underneath of the bank. So you have to flip it upside down. Now, thankfully, in Gottlieb games, they're hinged. And you just loosen a couple wing nuts and they flip out and you can take a look at it. But it's still, kind of irritating to work on. That said, there was a problem with one of those. And there were a couple other, minor tweaks, like a single pole double throw switch that was hitting both sides all the time. That led to some interesting action. And, a couple things like that. But overall, got it up and rolling pretty quickly. A couple other minor tweaks. Outlane switch was always registering 50 points instead of the 200. No one likes getting robbed. So that was a simple switch adjustment. There's a dual ganged switch on those that allows for the alternating relay to score or not. And one of them was just a little too far away. So that one was back up and rolling pretty quick. And then it was on to Bally Sheba. Now, Sheba, Ryan, what year was that?
I think that was 1964, and it's a game that I gravitated to because of the artwork. I've got a 1964 Bally Hayride, which is done by a mystery artist. It's uncredited as to who did Hayride and Sheba, and in my opinion, I think they're the same artist. At least the playfield of Sheba is the same as the backglass and playfield for Hayride. That I'm almost certain that the backglass for Sheba was done by someone else. The faces just have a different
are
look.
very odd, yeah.
Yes, and the anatomy is just a little more fluid and not quite realistic, as realistic as this artist who I'm enamored with. But the playfield on Sheba is so environmentally conceived. It's this, maiden sort of lounging and a guy who's playing a lute. And as you sort of look up, there are these trees that start arching up to the sky, and there's a blue color in the top of the playfield, which is the sky, and that's continued onto the plastics throughout the whole playfield. And one of the neatest things is that they used this metallic gold screen printing ink when printing these playfield plastics. I mean, you just don't see this metallic artwork anymore. It's something that's on my 56 scoreboard on the back glass. It's neat to see it on the playfield on Shiba. And so I just think it's such a gorgeous machine. So I've not had the time to get to it. But now that Nick's here, he's been helping me out a whole lot. And now it's up and running like a champ. So I'm really interested in putting some games on here.
Yeah, it's I find the playfield pretty fun as well on this one. It's Ted Zale mushroom targets, order of the day. But it's got this nice sequence that's actually split up into 3. So you have mushroom targets 1 through 6, and targets 1 through 3 will open up the top gate.
Oh, we better reference this.
Ryan doesn't trust my memory, which I think is probably sound. Loading up the engine.
Now we can speak about this with authority. Let's see here. So of those 6 mushroom targets, targets 1 through 3 open the bottom gate. Targets 4 and 5 open the top gate. Target number 6 alone will open the top gate, which is really an ingenious little path that the ball takes, and maybe we can talk about that in a second.
Mm-hmm.
But then it also gangs some of these targets. Like if you hit 1 through 5, all of them will open the middle gate, and when all 6 are lit, then special lights. And special is in the left out lane, and each of these gates that we're talking about, top, middle, and bottom gate, will redirect the ball to the shooter lane and give you some additional score. 50 points, 100 points, 150 points. I can't remember the exact denominations, but as far as the playfield layout is concerned, there's this, I guess you might call it a loop shot, for lack of a better term. Basically, there's a lane on the far left side that has a rollover, and that rollover is insert number 6. And if you recall, I said insert number 6 alone will open the top gate. Well, if you launch that ball up there hard enough, it loops around to just under the top rollovers and screams across the side of the playfield and enters that gate. So if you don't hit it hard enough, the gate will still open. But if you hit that shot super square, wow, is it ever satisfying?
And the game has that beautiful Bally 50-volt feel. So everything hits super hard and feels very nice, including the flippers. It makes such a difference. But one of my favorite things about it is actually the slingshots, which are aimed at each other. There's a third slingshot kicker, which is mounted above and to the right of the bottom right slingshot kicker. So the lower left and that upper right one will fire back and forth at each other, and you get this kind of talking effect.
And that's something that was continued on into Hayride, where there's not 3 slingshots, there's 4. And so once I get that thing up and running, I think it's going to be a wild and woolly time.
Now, Ryan won't let me touch that one. But one day. I've never played one of those either, and I'm quite interested in giving that a shot.
Me too. I took a little drive for that one.
I remember. So back to Shiba, we got a couple issues there. The biggest one was that the player up unit was not resetting fully, and the logic for the game requires that player up unit to reset back to 0. Now, in this era of Bally, or at least in this game, the player up unit was actually divided 1 rivet per ball. This is a 2-player game, and so there are 5 balls total that you can have, and so there are 10 positions total that this unit has. Unfortunately, it was resetting back to position 1 or 2, depending on how you index. I always index at 0, and therefore the game couldn't start because it didn't think it had fully reset. The motor wouldn't continue to run, but nothing would work properly. And it would always be in a 2-player game because position 1 or 2, again, depending on how you index, is actually player 2's ball 1. So in order to fix this, I just had to disassemble. I went ahead and re-cleaned, even though this unit was nice enough to eat off of. Went ahead and did that and laid down a little bit more lube, and it was good to go. We did some experimentation with springs at first, but it wasn't the clock spring. Sometimes that requires one extra turn in order to make it back home, but it would do that, but then that spring strength was too much for it to overcome when it was stepping up. So just had to re-lube it. It was good to go. And
little plug for PBR grease right here.
Oh, absolutely. So that stuff came out relatively recent, I guess, in the past few years. And I'd been using 3-in-1 for everything, and I've swore by that for a very long time. But now this PBR grease is phenomenal. It's certainly more viscous, and it tends to stay around longer than the 3-in-1. So I'm a complete convert to that stuff. I've got a tube, put it on my toast, put some in my hair every day. And
is that how you get it to stay so straight?
It is, yes. Okay. It's just phenomenal stuff. So I've been using that quite a bit. And the other thing that I did on this, there were a couple of minor playfield issues. Like the first time we lifted the playfield, I think one of the switch tabs broke off, that kind of thing. But easily remedied, easily fixed. So that was good. And there's nothing like working on a Bally. I mean, their mechanisms are so nice and so well thought out. I really, truly appreciate working on Bally games the most. And, that probably stems from my love of bingo pinball. But that said, their mechanisms are probably the easiest to service out of any of them. Even in this era where in flipper games they were using these carousel motors because they take up less space. Shiba in particular has this massive trip bank that's divided into two. You've got your sequence trip bank of 1 through 6, and then you've got another trip bank that is your player tilts and your second player relay and those kind of things. And each of them has this massive 120 volt solenoid that drives it. So when you start the game, Kurchuk,
whoa,
that's the sound it makes.
Hulk Baldrick is destroying the studio here.
So that was Shiba. Again, relatively minor fix here. Worked on Fox Hunt, got that slid back into your lineup.
Yeah.
So that was exciting.
Shoehorned a 10th game into my arcade.
Yeah, I'm trying to push them all in there. So Fox Hunt had a socket that was shorted, and I had cautioned Ryan about this prior to his leaving with the game, but as soon as he got it home, it managed to short out and caused a problem. So I got that resolved, and I resolved it by desoldering that socket, and now it should be in good shape. Ryan was also able to find a set of relays for Fox Hunt that somebody had cut out of a machine that they had parted out. So I was able to install the missing coil and readjust a couple of the switches in those trip banks, and things are working as they should. It's wonderful. So it's nice to get that in there too. So you've got this row of woodies here, and then you've got kind of your early metal rails, and then you got your solid state things over in the corner, as they should be. But the biggest thing that I worked on so far was a puck bowler. And this is a United Thunderbird Shuffle Alley.
Yeah.
And what year was that?
77, I think.
It's a late one.
Yeah.
And it's EM. So as one of the later, or maybe one of the latest EMs that Williams/United made, it's very featureful. There are 6 different game modes.
I think it's 5, right?
There are 5 different game modes.
6 being beer frame,
frame.
which comes up every once in a while.
Which I'm confusing, yeah.
But looks like it's in a place where a mode or a play, what do you call it, mechanic should be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I always get confused. I'm pushing the selector. I can't select beer frame. Why not?
Nick is always trying to select beer frame.
I mean, look, somebody has to. So yeah, whoever had this before had set the beer frame to come up most frequently. So there are little Jones plug selectors, and you can set which frames it comes up on. They set 3, 5, and 8. Someone was really thirsty that had this game. So I had new pins to install. So the pin deck needed servicing as well. The game was completely inoperational. All the steppers needed attention of some sort or other. I went through and rebuilt all the steppers. There were 2 motors.
Did you rebuild the steppers?
Yeah.
Huh. I didn't realize you did that. You must have done that in the dark of night, too.
I did, yes. And there are a lot of steppers in there.
I know. Yeah. This is like 3 pinball machines jammed into one cabinet. There's a ton of stuff back there. Don't let this false modesty fool you guys. There's a ton of stuff in this thing.
Compared to a bingo, it's nothing.
You have a very high level of comparison if you're comparing everything to a bingo. I guess everything would be easy after that.
See? That's why everyone needs a bingo to start out on. That should be there first. So the most difficult thing was really figuring out how everything comes apart. So I've worked on shuffles before, and the work that I had to do to them was much less intensive. These weren't completely dead projects. It was, something's not scoring appropriately, or, this pin never goes up, that kind of thing. Those are pretty easy problems to track down, but figuring out how to pull out the pin deck on this particular machine was a bit of a challenge. I figured there was some sort of locking mechanism, and there's not, or else it's missing from your game, and I don't know which. But once I worked through those kind of challenges, it was very serviceable. I was very pleased that I could access everything. And the lane doesn't flip up like the ones that I'd worked on previously. So all the lane switches you take off the tray. Your tray is missing that catches the effluvium that you put on the lane.
The tiny balls.
Yeah. So basically all the switches are just right there, and you just poke at them and make sure everything's good. And all the 55s, those are special bulbs, by the way. I need to get you that list. But for flash and strike bonus, those are the 2 modes that use those. So worked through that, got it up and running with regulation scoring. And the final problem that I had, though, was that it was always in 2-player mode, and it would only play regulation. I could not get it to switch mode, and you can only do that after pushing start the first time, before you bowl the first puck. And for some reason I just could not get that going, so went all through the circuits, was looking at the schematic, and the schematic's about 1.5 miles long.
Nothing compared to a bingo, though.
Nothing at all. So I was right in my element. Had the manual as well, which is nice, and I'm looking at this thing and I'm going, this isn't making a lot of sense. So once I start seeing something like that, I look for other problems which are kind of similar, or I think might be related, or might not, but they need fixing anyway. And so you give your brain a break from the thing that's driving you nuts, and you try to fix something else. And one of the things is there were 2 additional score reels mounted in the pin deck. One that counts your frames, and that always counted correctly, and I was pleased with that. I rebuilt that reel. Oh, and Ryan had rebuilt about 86 score reels in this thing prior to me coming here. And while I was here, he rebuilt the final one. This game had one of the reels cut out, and so I had to solder that in. It was also missing the pin reset motor, which was a bit of a scary challenge because it's a dual ganged motor. It requires a lot of beef to move those pins back down. The reset arm is not light with the full weight of all those pins. So this motor was just separate, and there were only 3 wires, but there are 4 wires coming from the motor. So I knew something was up there, and as it turned out, each side was tied together, so that made it pretty easy to install. But I had to make sure, because I definitely didn't want to burn this new motor out.
Yeah, it was pretty scary realizing that the entire motor was gone from this machine from 1977, and there's not a lot of those motors out there. And
which is shocking.
Yeah.
You'd think there'd be a ton of them.
Yeah, 40-year-old motors grow on trees around here.
I mean, that's what I think.
But yeah, after contacting Steve Young, he did not have them, but he said, if you find one, I can rebuild it. And he pointed me to a guy who he thought might have them. And sure enough, when I called up this guy, he said, you know what? I've got one, and it's wrapped up in a blue ribbon. It's got your name on it.
Hey.
And I really started to worry. And so I asked him the question, how much do you want for it? And he was very reasonable with me, and so was Steve Young. I had the guy send it directly to Steve Young so Steve could repair it, and he sent it to me. And then I held on to it in my tight little hands until you got here, because I was a little frightened about how to install a motor because I'd never installed one before. But anyway, you made short work of that.
I was pleased that I wasn't trying to do this remotely.
Yeah, me too.
Because I would have been thrown off by the lack of 3 leads off the motor, and I would have been second guessing myself from Richmond all this time.
Yeah.
So it was good that I was here. So that was good, but back to the problem with the game not starting and not being able to choose the mode. There's a second score reel that's mounted in that pin deck, and it tells you the number of players. You can go from 1 to 6 players.
Hence the 86 score reels.
Right. And unfortunately, that reel would never reset. And so I figured, there's some kind of simple resetting problem on that one. I'd rebuilt that reel previously, checked the gapping in the switch. There's just a switch for the 0 position, which is actually 1 on that reel. It's kind of a funky reel. There's 10 positions like any other score reel, but most of them are 6.
Yep. It's the devil reel. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 6, 6, 6, 6, 6.
So that one wasn't resetting, and I said, all right, let me take a break from this, and I'll take a look there. Well, after examining that reel, not very closely, I noticed that one of the tiny, tiny wires that comes off of that limit switch was broken off. And so I resoldered it, and bam, it fixed not only the resetting of the reel, but also, of course,
selection,
game start, and selection.
Nice.
So all that was tied to just that reel. That was a pleasant surprise. Now that game also continues to have a problem, and that is that in certain modes it is scoring inappropriately. For the most part, it scores correctly. It scores correctly in regulation, from what I can tell, for all 6 players, which is
most impressive.
Consider that a coup. But as far as Flash goes, Flash, you're supposed to earn some multiple of hundreds of points, depending on if you get a spare or a strike. And unfortunately, in certain positions of the Flash motor, it's scoring nothing. And that's pretty frustrating.
Or 100 less than what you're supposed to get.
Right. So if what you're supposed to get for a strike is 300 points, you only get 200. For example. And not getting enough points, very frustrating. Especially
no one likes to be robbed.
I mean, it's true, especially when you're deep in competition for that beer frame. So yeah, I'm still working that one out. That seems to be some kind of short, but or it could be just a finger on the Flash motor stepper. It's not really a stepper, but Williams constructed them that way. It's a motorized stepper. So take a look at that and see what I can do. And then you've got 2 more projects, basically, and one which I've been forbidden to touch. And
that's Hayride. Yeah.
It's making me a little crazy, but it's okay. And then the other is Williams Ragmop.
Yes.
And Ragmop is a really interesting game. It's one of the single flipper games from Williams.
Yeah, the first, if I am not mistaken.
Really? Okay. And this is a pretty big, a sizable project, I would say.
Yeah, yeah. It's something I picked up from a very generous Pinsider. Larry Biza posted something on Pinside about how he's got this single flipper project, and for anybody who's interested in fixing it up, he'd hand it to him for free. And he made a post about this, and I think you were the one who notified me that this was happening, and I had been on the lookout for a single flipper game ever since I played Williams' Nine Sisters, and that is a fantastic game, and I hope to one day get my hands on one of those. That would be another coup of my collecting lifetime if I can find one of those. And but I saw this rag mop, and so I contacted Larry, and he was several states away from me in Minnesota, which sounds close as the crow flies from Michigan, but there's this big lake in between us, and so consequently it's probably about a 9 or 10 hour drive between us. But I asked him if he was going to the Chicago Coin Op show, and it turned out he was, and he was willing to bring it there. And so it was turned out to only be about a 3.5 hour drive for me, and a wonderful weekend at the Chicago Coin Op show. So anyway, I picked that up back in November, and I've been working on some other stuff in the meantime. Haven't had a chance to get to it, but in response to your mention of it being a major project, essentially the entire top of the playfield has delaminated and cracked and needs to be secured and re-glued somehow. So, I need to take that out of there, and I'm your suggestion, which I think was a sound one, was to depopulate about half of the playfield, so the whole top laminate doesn't slip off the playfield, and then glue that half, and then repopulate that half, and then depopulate the last half, and glue that, move on with life, and then once that's secure, then think about retouching and clear coating and other things that make Nick cringe. But I think with this, even you would agree that a clear coat is necessary, because with those cracks and wobbles in the playfield, it's got to be evened out somehow.
You're going to have to sand it down, and even, there's no way it's going to be even without some kind of coat.
Yeah.
Clear or...
And by sanding it down, you mean sand down the clear coat.
I mean, yeah.
Not sand down the artwork.
I mean sand down the artwork.
You can draw your stick bears on the playfield.
Yeah.
And
Well, actually, in the middle is actually where I'm thinking of. In the middle, there is a major crack that runs all the way through.
Uh-huh.
And I'm thinking you're going to have to sand those to get them even with each other.
I wonder if when half of it is depopulated and, we put some sort of wood glue in there and clamp it back down, if that clamping process might not flatten it out enough.
You can hope.
I'm an optimist.
I notice that all the time.
We've established this. I have blind hope.
But I feel like it's got this warp in the wood there, and you're probably going to have to do some
clamp
work
it
to
down and hope that it
and
flattens out.
clamp it down and hope for the best. Right? That's exactly what I'm saying. So
had enough of your reason.
I mean, what can I say? So in a few moments here, we're actually going to be going to tackle the final project, and this is my favorite project, and that's a ballerina.
Bingo.
Yeah.
Yep.
So this resides with Ryan as well, and I'm looking forward to cracking it open and seeing how it goes.
Yeah. This is another one that was really serendipitously fell in my lap, and I want to send a big thanks out to Pinsider Yancey, who, we were on a Facebook group of one form or another, and I think it was Sean Kavanaugh who popped onto some thread of a picture of my game room, and he sort of sarcastically said, "Oh, you need more flipperless games in there." And I said, "Actually, I'm very interested in getting more flipperless games." And now I have a couple with Fox Hunt and Metro. But Yancey chimed in and he said, "Oh, actually, I have one. Do you want it?" And I'm thinking a negotiation is going to ensue. Well, how much do you want for it? What do you have? What condition is it in? And he's like, "Oh, my parents have this old bingo game." And I'd always wanted a bingo after listening to a number of your podcasts and coming to Bingo Row and getting to experience these, really interesting games and a really interesting part of pinball history. I'd like to have something from every decade of pinball's history at some point. That's my delusional pie in the sky dream for my collection. I have, what are we up to, like 6 decades right now? But anyway, that aside, bingo is such an important part of pinball history, and why well, part of the reason why so many things bear the for amusement only moniker, and why so many pinball machines were destroyed at one point in time, thought to be gambling machines, and some of that is more true with bingos. Not to say that there's not skill involved with bingo, but there is definitely an aspect of winning thousands of replays that you can never actually play, and how do you cash out of that? Well, you've covered that on your podcast before. So anyway, I think that's a really interesting part of history, and I want to have something in my collection like that. So to make this long story a little bit shorter, Yancey said, yeah, my parents have this old bingo game. And I was like, oh, my ears perked up. And I said, well, what is it? What do you want for it? And he's like, they don't play it anymore. Do you want it? Yes, I do. So it's been actually sitting in my office since I got it. And by my office, I mean my actual workplace office. And it's been quite a talking piece as
I'm sure
different folks come in. And every time I crack open that back box, you can see their eyes turn into saucers. And, oh my gosh, I can't believe all that, makes the game run. And I'm like, yeah, it's, multiple machines crammed into one back box. And it weighs a little bit, and they're awfully fun. And one of these days it'll get up and running. So hopefully today's the day. We're about to head over to my office and check that out here in a little bit.
Absolutely. Ballerina is a Magic Screen game, and it's one of the ones that has an extra section on the Magic Screen. It's also the only game where rollovers qualify your Magic Screen. So if you have A, B, C, D lit for the first 4 sections of the screen, you can hit the rollovers to qualify E, F, G, and H. Unfortunately, the rub of it is that you have to hit the rollover twice to qualify the next letter. But it's also the only game that has this feature called 1 to 7, 7 to 1. And with that, you can switch back and forth between 1 being equal to 1, or 1 being equal to 7, and on across that top row. And that is such a brain bender that I often just completely waste the chance to use it for any good whatsoever. But I really enjoy that game, and I'm looking forward to getting yours up and running here.
Cool.
So we'll see. And got my Needs Foot oil. So I'm going to have my ritual bath in it, like I always do.
I'll leave the office while you
okay.
light the incense
Thank you.
Burn the candles.
Yeah. The sacrificial bowl and all that stuff. No, I don't anticipate it being a big deal, especially if his parents were playing it. It should just need some light maintenance. So looking forward to that.
It looks like everything's there, and it doesn't look too hacked up. I've popped it open a number of times, and aside from it being crammed with mechs, it doesn't look like there's been hacky stuff done to it. So
that's what I like to hear.
Yeah, we'll cross our fingers. That's actually the case.
And you had a replacement back glass,
yes,
if I recall.
Yeah, so it was very interesting. This came with an immaculately screen printed, horrible back glass. So the original back glass was gone. Who knows where it is? But this was a ballerina back glass that was re-illustrated, recolored by some outsider artist. I don't know what they were thinking, but anyway, they reproduced this in a very technically adept way. It was screen printed. It had the masking layer. Everything was perfectly registered, and the colors were very vibrant and smooth, and it looked from printing like it was a production glass, but from the artwork, oh no. So Koos in the Netherlands, if I'm not mistaken, is that right?
Yep.
Prints these back glass films, and you and I were both very curious about this, and I know you were curious about it for your multi-bingo. Mm-hmm. And we kind of ordered something from Koos a while back, and I tested it out on a piece of glass. I actually got a piece of tempered glass made for myself because I have a very active son, and if something goes through the glass, I'd rather it turn into diamonds than gigantic daggers. And so, anyway, to make a long story short, the back glass film was very easy to apply. Koos has an instructional video on his website, which maps out how to do this. And, essentially with soapy water, you can reposition this film on your big sheet of glass and until you have it in a place that you want it. And then you just squeegee out the bubbles. And, I've been really happy with how this turned out. And I know you've got one too. I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on it.
It's gorgeous.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really amazing. And I've messed with a number of different types of translite type material. This is by far the best and the easiest to apply out of any. So, I mean, that's a big shout out to Koos.
Yeah,
I mean, it's an amazing product.
I will give it my 99.9% approval rating. It's very well printed. The mask on the back is very well registered. And the only reason I withhold a percentage of a percentage is because if you're looking for an authentically flat, colored, screen printed back glass, it's not exactly that. It is digitally printed. And so if you do look very closely and you're as anal retentive as I am, you'll see that it's made up of these very tiny dots, but you have to get very, very close in order to see them. And so from a player's perspective, you are never going to see these. If you're inspecting it from a couple inches away, you will, but nobody does that except for me. So I was very happy with the quality and the ease of install. So yeah, I would highly recommend his product.
Yeah, and he actually does full mirroring as well.
But with the caveat that he will not ship it.
He will now.
Is that true?
Yes, that's a relatively recent change.
Oh.
It ain't cheap.
I was gonna say, I'm guessing you're paying for that.
Yeah, but if you want authentic glass, you can do that now, and it's printed directly on glass. So that is quite cool. I'm very thankful that such a resource exists, even if he's half a world away. And you can attest to this. He's just a joy to work with.
Yes, yeah, so easy to communicate with. A very highest possible recommendation for him.
So that's all good. And now we come to the final year of Flipperless. So I wanted Ryan to join me because he was actually the one who recommended the year of Flipperless back a year ago. And for the final episode, I wanted to do his newest game, which is Genko's Metro.
Yes. This was one of my top 3 Flipperless grails. I have always seen Metro and thought, what a gorgeous art package this was. It's got this futuristic cityscape, at least from the lens of somebody from 1940. And on the back glass, you've got these, dome-shaped and retro-modern looking buildings and these futuristic cars, which look very much like cars from the 1940s with fins put on them. And the playfield itself has this gorgeous landscape of skyscrapers and more of what's on the back glass in a different way, essentially. And as Flipperless games they have a bunch of bumpers, and these bumpers are pretty unique. They are these bell-shaped bumpers, which are not unique to Metro, but pretty unique to Genko. I don't know of any other manufacturers that made these, but I believe Genko's Four Roses also had the bell bumpers, and I haven't done a lot of combing of IPDB to figure out what other games had bell bumpers, but I don't think it's a ton. So I'm not sure where to start with this because I feel like there's actually a whole lot to talk about with this game.
There is.
So my example actually came from a person who worked at a mold and die casting company. And I say that because some of the bell bumpers were cracked and worn and burned and didn't look too pretty. And he took it upon himself to take one of the good-looking bumpers, the bell bumpers, and cast one of those bell bumpers and make a number of replacements for those bottom bumpers, which needed replacing, which I would have never known how to do otherwise. So I feel really fortunate to have purchased it from this particular person who went through that trouble. I don't know where we should go from here. Maybe gameplay? Should we talk about gameplay?
Let's talk about the rule set.
Okay. So this back glass has a set of cars on the bottom left portion of the back glass, and there's 12 of them, and they will increment around based on bumpers that are hit. Now, if you hit an unlit bumper, it advances the cars one space along this futuristic highway. And if you advance those cars all the way around, meaning the 12 different spots, if you advance 12, then it awards you 1,000 points. Now, if you, let's see, where should we go from here? Why don't we talk about the top purple bumpers? There are 5 purple bumpers up top, and they are numbered 1 through 5. And in order to light them, you have to hit them in sequence. So if you hit the 1 first, it lights up, and then subsequently the 2, etc. But if you hit them out of order, they do not light up. They simply advance a car. So again, any unlit bumper advances a car. Once it is lit, if you hit that lit bumper again, it advances the bonus, and the bonus is counted from 1, then 2, 3, 4, on up, upward sequentially. And the bonuses in this game awards you that in thousands of points. But it doesn't just award you those points for draining like modern games do. You actually have to maneuver it into a particular rollover as you drain. So there's essentially 4 different places you can navigate the ball through at the bottom of the playfield. And there's 2 extreme sides, the left and right, which have no rollover. And then there's a bell bumper in the middle, which is flanked on either side by a tiny bumper. It's basically just a lighted post with a rubber on it. And between those bumpers and the central bell bumper, there's a rollover. So you have 1 of 2 spots to go through with a rollover. And those alternate based on which cars are lit on the back glass. So if cars 1 through 5, not 6, if cars 1 through 5 are lit, then side A is lit, or one side is lit. I can't remember if it's left or right. And then when it gets to car 6, the lights go out. And then cars 7 through 11 will light the other side, and then car 12 will make the lights go out. So there are times where neither side is going to be lit. And so as you're maneuvering the ball around and just bouncing off that lit post and over to the bell bumper, you have these strategic decisions to make about nudging the game and how many times you want it to hit that bell bumper in order for it to light the post where you're at. And sometimes it'll hit it just enough times where it could have navigated through there to award you that bonus, but you hit it 1 too many times and you went through when it was dark, and it really makes for some interesting gameplay. So back up to those 5 bumpers. As I mentioned, unlit bumpers move a car. Lit purple bumpers advance bonus, which can be collected through the lit out hole. And if you light all 5 purple bumpers, then those bumpers, the lit bumpers, 1 through 5, start awarding you replays instead of potential bonus. So that is something I have achieved once in my dozens and dozens of plays on Metro so far. I've owned this game for maybe about a month at this point. And let's see what else we have in this play field. There are a couple of nests of bumpers that are in sort of a triangular sequence. The nest on the left is yellow, and the nest on the right is green. And in the middle of the top 2 bumpers is a rollover, and right below that is an insert of the same color. So the yellow bumpers have a yellow insert, the green bumpers have a green insert, and if that insert is lit, and you can roll over that rollover between the top 2 colored bumpers, then it lights that whole nest of 3 bumpers. Meaning, If you hit those bumpers when they're unlit, once again, car advances. Not a whole lot of payback, but if you do it 12 times, you'll get 1,000 points. But once those bumpers are lit, those lit colored bumpers will give you 1,000 points each hit. Likewise for the green one. Now, the insert is lit in the same manner that the bottom out lanes are lit, meaning cars 1 through 5 will light the yellow insert, cars 7 through 11 will light the green insert, and you can only light those nests if the insert is lit. And once again, cars 6 and 12 will not light anything. Right in between those, there's a purple bumper, which is always lit, which means it will always advance bonus. And below that, there is a row of 4 bumpers, in between each of which is a rollover lane, A, B, and C. So this is another sequence that you can achieve. And if you are able to make it through A, B, and C, and then make it through the bottom rollover lane that is lit, which traditionally awards you thousands of points of bonus, it converts those numbers of bonus points not into thousands of points, but rather replays. So there's a number of ways to get replays in this game. There's a number of different sequences, and a surprisingly deep game for a flipperless pinball machine made in 1940, almost 80 years ago at this point. Mm-hmm. It's really something to behold, and a whole lot of fun. I've played literally 24 games in a row and not grown tired of this game. I love it to pieces, and so glad I found it.
Yeah, me too. I've never played one before or seen one, but I'd read Russ Jensen's write-up on it, which spoke extremely highly of the game.
Yes, and a couple things. First of all, I wanted to mention Russ Jensen's write-up about it, which is really fantastic. But there's a couple things that I wanted to add to and correct about Russ Jensen's write-up. And one is he refers to these white bumpers at the bottom, which I actually think were not white. I have those original bumpers that were replaced with these custom molded bumpers that I mentioned a little earlier, and they are sort of a faded peach pink color, and originally marbled, obviously came with the game, and the circles just underneath those bumpers are that same peachy pink type color, and I think that they were originally peach, and the guy that reproduced these bumpers made them that same color that's underneath them, which I think was probably correct. Of course, they're not marbled like they were originally, but far more functional than they were. So I wanted to mention that because he refers to these white bumpers a number of times. And then secondly, he didn't go into the detail about how and when these 2 out lanes light alternately, and likewise for the nests of colored bumpers, yellow or green, on either side of the middle of the playfield will light. So I hope I clarified that a little bit, or put you to sleep, one of the two, in my explanation moments ago.
Well, yeah, the game is extremely fun. I came down there and whooped you on it, and
within Nick's second game, he had trumped my high score. And my high score was 40,000 points until Nick got there, and then he, in his second game, got 41,000 points. So now I've got something to work for.
Not much of a whooping, but yeah. I got to see if I can increase that lead a little bit. But yeah, the game is extremely fun. The fact that there are multiple sequences, I love games where there are more than one way to win. Yeah. And it's not just score and one sequence, for example. The fact that there are so many different things that you can achieve as the ball is rolling down this playfield that you have no hope of bringing back up.
Right.
To redo the sequence. I mean, it's quite a lot to think about on the fly, and I love thinking games, as you might imagine. So yeah, this game is fantastic, and I highly recommend it. So you're bringing it to York, right?
I doubt that, but I don't know. We'll have to talk with Pat Gallagher. hitching a ride with him from Pittsburgh onward, and I have a feeling that he's going to want to keep an empty van in case he finds anything there. So
That makes sense.
that might be a tough sell. But one of these days, when I can take my son with me, and we've got nothing but room in our car,
Sounds good.
have to bring it out.
So the final thing I wanted to talk with you about was actually Swinger.
Yes.
And Swinger, we famously talked. I mean, it was all over the news. Episode 100.
Yeah.
Of my
Yeah.
show. So this is some time ago, and I said, I'm going to have you back when you're done fixing it up.
That's what podcasters say, though, right?
Yeah, it
we're going to
is.
have you back.
And then
Never.
it never happens. So I've got you cornered here.
All right.
I thought we could talk a little bit about this. Now, this is reaching back in time.
Totally.
Quite a ways.
As you bring this up, I'm trying to remember what in the world I talked about when I was on episode 100,
So
where I was at in this restoration process.
basically, you had just finished rebuilding the score reels. And you still had a lot of units left to rebuild. And, of course, the game had not turned on yet. Now, the thing that I had asked you to do was to go ahead and rebuild all the stepper units and make sure they moved cleanly and smoothly. And then we would attack each individual problem as it came up to get you up and running as quickly as possible. So I just wanted to talk with you a bit about that process, if you recall it. And from score reels on, was working on the steppers much of a challenge for you?
So I'm trying to remember. I'm certain there were some challenges therein, and I documented this really heavily on a Pinside thread, and maybe we can link to that in the show notes.
Yeah.
And that documentation is a far better memory than I'm ever able to recall right now. But all that to say, essentially, it was taking apart a unit and putting it back together and cleaning it a bunch in the process. And I probably cleaned it way more than I needed to, but that's, again, my anal retentive personality. I want to make sure everything is shiny and new as possible anyway. But because I did that, I feel pretty confident that those units are going to be fully functional far into the future. And so, if I can avoid getting in there again, that's what I like. I like playing them. But I also genuinely like working on them too when I can make the time to do it. As you were over here and I was working on that last score reel for United Thunderbird, I really sort of harkened back to these late nights I was pulling as I was working on Swinger. And there's really this like restful, contemplative Zen mindset that you get in when you're disassembling, cleaning, reassembling, getting everything back together, and working toward this more functional game. I really enjoy that and miss it, and look forward to getting back to it. So, maybe I said this on episode 100. I don't remember. I should have listened to it before you came here, but I never really understood when people would say, I like working on games better than I like playing them. And I don't know that I'm going to say that yet, but I certainly understand why they would say that. There's this very meditative quality about working on games and refurbishing them. And then there's this huge payoff. You've got this giant toy to play with when you're done. And that's pretty gratifying. I mean, I feel bad on one hand that you've been doing a lot of work on my game since you've been here on vacation, but I also kind of understand a little bit that there's this big feeling of accomplishment once you get something working that was previously not. And I mean, when Swinger sprang to life, it was quite a feeling. And then subsequently diagnosing some of these problems, which I documented in that thread, and getting a little more familiar with schematics and being able to diagnose problems on my own without the training wheels of some pinside saints like yourself and Pecos, and there's more people than I can name that helped me through that machine. And so for anybody out there who's contemplating, I don't know that I can understand electromechanical games, and I've heard so many people say, oh, electromechanical is more complicated than solid state. And I don't believe it for a second. Yes, when you pop this thing open, it looks like a rat's nest of wires and it looks like an insurmountable mountain to climb. But I am the least technically savvy person involved in the pinball hobby, and I was able to nurse this thing back to health with the help of lots of great people in the hobby. So if there's a chance for you to pick up a machine, I would highly suggest it. And hop onto Pinside, hop onto the EM forums. It's very friendly there, despite what you have experienced in the more mainstream threads. The EM forums, the EM threads are just filled with knowledgeable people who are ready to help and super friendly. And I don't know how they do it, to be honest with you, because I would upload countless pictures, as you know, and I would have folks get on there and say, oh, well, I think this post was misplaced, or I think your rubber is misplaced, or I think this or that or the other thing. And I'd look at it, and sure enough, they'd have some great suggestions, and I'd fix things based on what I was uploading. And it was really a gratifying experience. So if you're asking me to be a poster boy for EM tech, I'm happy to be that.
Well, good. That's what I was asking. Well, yeah, and if I recall correctly, there were only some minimal amount of switch adjustments needed to get that thing to spring to life. I think it was maybe 6.
Yeah. Again, I'd have to go back in that thread, but it was minimal. Yeah, I think it was probably 90-95% working once everything was disassembled and reassembled. And yeah, it's funny, once you're in this hobby, solutions to things pop up in the strangest of places. I was exhibiting my work. For those who aren't familiar with me, I'm an artist, and I've done artwork for various pinball companies and events and podcasts and different things in terms of posters and shirts and blanking on it. Anyways, I've done some art stuff, and I was exhibiting my work at the VFW Pinball Show in Ann Arbor, and an attendee happens by, and we start talking about pinball and our collections and the subject of this project that I was doing at that time came up, and I was poking through some pictures on my phone, and at that moment, I was having a problem with a particular unit, and I didn't know what was going on. And he looked at the picture and he said, "Oh, your printed circuit board is cocked. You just need to unscrew these screws and write it again, and then that spider unit is going to be directly on those rivets, and then all will be right in the world." And sure enough, that's exactly what it was. And it was just because I had sort of launched myself into the hobby. And when you're in a community, you start getting to know people and you start learning things, and it's been such a fun ride. I'm just head over heels about being in the pinball hobby, and I think we've got a lot more to come.
That's good. And speaking of that, just as I and many of the other bingo collectors curate this bingos for sale thread on Pinside, you've kind of taken up the mantle of the flipperless games.
Yeah. I am getting very interested in pinball history, and I've been, purchasing the Dick Buchel books and reading up on pinball history and talking with pinball historians and meeting designers. And I think it's such a rich hobby. I mean, you can get into so many different things in terms of gameplay or competition or restoration or fixing games or buying and selling or pinball history. And the history itself is just so rich once you get into the number of manufacturers that used to make pinball machines back in the early days, and in the 30s, there were seemingly millions of manufacturers. That's a gross overstatement, but there were a lot, which is a far cry from when I got into the hobby, and there was literally one manufacturer standing. And thankfully, we've come a considerable way since then. But yeah, I think it's so interesting to see where pinball has come from and the different innovations that have happened, and where a lot of quote unquote innovations of today originated from.
Right.
So, yeah, I'm in head over heels. I am very interested in the history, and like you said, sort of spearheading this flipperless for sale thread. I'm not the one who created it, but it was kind of a big light bulb when I saw it, and the thread had kind of gone dormant for, I think it might have been a couple years or so. And, I was enjoying looking through the thread itself and seeing what had been posted. And then when I got through it, I thought, I want more. And so I started poking around and sharing what I had found with people. And that thread has sort of been revitalized in recent months, I would say. And it's been nice to see other people hop on there too occasionally and post a flipperless find that I didn't find on my expeditions around the web. So yeah, it's been pretty exciting, gratifying. It's always fun for me to learn new things, and it seems like there's not a shortage of things to learn about in pinball history.
Especially the older games. I mean, the older you go, the more of a mystery it kind of is.
Yeah.
And that's always been extremely appealing to me.
Yeah, I feel like this Bally mystery artist is just the tip of the iceberg. I mean, that was in the early 60s, and you start going back further than that, and some of it's documented, but there's a lot that isn't. And it's been fun trying to, piece some of these mysteries together.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and thanks for taking that suggestion of the year of flipperless and really running with it. It was fun for me to hear every couple weeks some new, to me, game that you had unearthed. And, throughout this past year, I don't know how many times I emailed you or called you or messaged you and said, where'd you find that one? How did that come about? And, inevitably it seemed like it was sort of this, being part of the hobby, you start to hear about stuff and learn about stuff, and you'd say, oh, well, it was mentioned in this thread, or an eBay sale came up, or something that inspired you. Occasionally you were combing IPDB, but it seemed like a lot of times it was sort of a serendipitous realization, like, oh, what's this game? And so that was fun to hear about too.
Yeah. Well, I love history, and especially pinball history. And as you say, it's just so fascinating. There's so many facets of it, and everything from the history with gambling and kind of the break or attempted break, and everything in between. It just all intrigues me to no end. So, talking about the older games, really giving them attention. Makes a difference, I think, and it gets people thinking about these games in a way that they normally don't, especially the flipperless games. I mean, you talk about 40s games and people just roll their eyes and walk away.
Yeah, that's another thing I wanted to address, is that these flipperless games, they get kind of a bad rap, and I think people are pretty dismissive of them before really giving them a fair shot. And I think I was guilty of that too for a long time. When I first got into pinball, my first game was a 90s game, and I was interested in the ramps and the call-outs and, the artwork like I am. And but I was interested in modern stuff. But the longer I've been around the pinball hobby, it seems the older my tastes lie. And, it was at your house when I visited a couple years ago where I first was able to put my hands on a flipperless game. And I was interested in a historical way, but not really in terms of gameplay. And out of your entire collection, I mean, you have a pretty diverse collection you've got a DMD title, you've got that killer Gottlieb Circus from the 80s, a ton of bingos, of course, horse race game, some a wedge head, what is that Williams game that you have, the Peacock one?
That's Chicago Coin Twinkie.
Chicago Coin Twinkie. Okay. And out of all of your lineup, I think I played Mystery, the flipperless game, the most. And that really turned my head around on flipperless games of, wow, there are interesting and complex and fun rule sets to these games. There's a lot of strategy. There's a lot more control than you might think. There's a lot based on plunge. There's a lot based on nudging, and all of these skills translate into modern games too, and make your modern pinball gameplay better. I played another flipperless game at York, and I was pretty sold after that. And now I've got a couple in my lineup, but I've heard so many people talking about, oh, flipperless are no fun, and oh, they're just destined for the garbage. They're parts machines, if anything. And man, that is such an ignorant point of view. If I had anything to say, I would say, get your hands on a flipperless machine, try it out, play it. There's a lot of fun to be had. I don't know what other recommendation I can give, but do not turn these things into coffee tables. They are worth so much more than that. Keep them intact, keep them playing. It was through this flipperless thread that somebody out in California found these a couple of games that a person was selling, and he picked up both of them. He only wanted one, but it was so cheap that he didn't want to let somebody pick it up for that cheap and turn it into a coffee table. Thankfully, he was willing to take that on. But through this flipperless thread, we've found a home for it with somebody who wants to keep it a pinball machine. And who knows how many of these even exist anymore.
Right.
I mean, this could be one of literally a handful of that title around anymore. And maybe less. Maybe less than a handful of those games. I mean, because they weren't producing a ton of them at the time. It's not Addams Family numbers. They were producing them in the hundreds, not the tens of thousands. So anyway, that's my soapbox call to action to not coffee tableize these pieces of history.
Well, I fully agree with that sentiment. So yeah, just try them out and see what you like. And there's plenty to go around. So if you don't happen to like the first flipperless game that you try a different era. I mean, they were making them for almost 20 years prior to the introduction of the flipper. And there were a lot of crazy design ideas that happened during that period of time.
Yes.
And it seems like every year there was some new gimmick, some new fad that designers would try to incorporate, and they wanted to be the first one on the block to have it. But usually it was the second or third one that had really the refinement that made it extremely fun. And so, just finding, be it a purely mechanical game, be it electromechanical, it doesn't matter. Flipperless is fun and extremely enjoyable. So, yeah, and we got enough coffee tables. Need more pinball machines. So,
amen.
With that, there's one more thing I wanted to talk about, but it's a bit of a surprise. So we won't be discussing this in detail. But Ryan and I will have something to reveal at York this year.
Oh yes, that's right. We will.
Yeah, you and I. So look forward to hearing about that. Of course, with the revelation of this year's Bingo Row, which is planning on coming up, and I'm so thankful that you're planning on coming down. And
I can't wait
making that trip.
I made my first trip to York in 2016 and had to miss 2017, so I am jonesing to get back in 2018 and already have work and family obligations in line that's going to allow this to happen. So if you've never been to York, it's a pretty incredible show if you're into the history of pinball. I've heard more modern focused complaints that there's not enough modern games, but to me, that's a refreshing way to run a show, to not have as many modern games, because how many Monster Bashes can you see? How many Ados families can you play? And they're everywhere. And I'm not saying that they're not good games, but as a collector, I really like to see games that I've never seen before. I like to put my hands and play on games that I've never seen and that I might not ever get to see again, and that excites me. So York has a wood rail row. York has a bingo row. Bingo Row in 2016 had the largest public showing of bingo pinball machines in one place that there had been since they were released. And I think that's pretty amazing. There's a ton of electromechanical games, from wedge heads to Williams to whatever your taste is, it's there. There are a lot of weird 80s, like System 80, System 80B games. There's a Spring Break that I never tried before. There was what is that robot game? Robo War or something?
Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of off the beaten path type of titles showed up. And that's what I love. That's what I love to play. And so that's why I'm jonesing to get back. And that's why I'm certainly not complaining at the, I don't even know if lack of is the right way to say it, but a less percentage of more modern games. I mean, they even had Total Nuclear Annihilation last year, and was that pre-production?
Designer was there. It was a production game, yeah. Scott Denisi was there too. I mean, York is a fantastic show, and it's very well-rounded. So what may feel like a lack of solid-state games is just really the rest of time catching up with it, you know? I've never really felt the lack of solid-state in all the years that I've been going to York. And even when I was new in the hobby and I was seeking out solid state games that I hadn't really played before, I could always find, a goodly variety there. I never felt like there wasn't enough. So definitely get out and try games. Try something out of your comfort zone. Try bingo. Definitely try bingo. In fact, try them all. And come see me. I mean, talk to me about some of these games. Get my recommendation. I'm happy to point you in the direction of a game that I think is quality. And I'm sure Ryan feels the same way. I mean, if you feel like there's not anything to play, then you're not trying.
Yeah, and just to give some more credit to Bingo Row, if you're hesitant about trying a bingo, I can understand why, because they are complex beasts, but there's a lot to enjoy in them too. And I say this only because I had a personal experience of trying a bingo at the Pinball Hall of Fame on my own, and it was a confusing experience. But Bingo Row is staffed by numerous bingo pinball owners who are there and ready and willing and happy to help explain to you how to play these games. And that's really where I got an appreciation for bingos and thought, yeah, I need one of these in my collection. One for now. We'll see if it grows from there.
Yeah. Well, we got to get this one working first.
Yeah. Well, speaking of which,
let's head on down the road.
Okay. Excellent. This has been great chatting with you, Nick. Thanks for having me on the show.
Thanks for your time.
You got it.
All right.